and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. John Thomas has a pet. It's been in the family for generations and was brought back from space a long time ago. It looks like a cross between a hippopotamus and a caterpillar and a large fraction of blue whale. It spent the last several generations growing. It got out. "Lad," said the police chief, "can you control that monster?" "Certainly, sir. I hope you're right. Mendoza, land him. Let him try it." "Yes, chief." Mendoza spoke to the driver, who moved the car past the viaduct and started letting down beyond it. Lummox could be seen then. He had taken refuge under the end of the bridge, making himself small for him. John Thomas leaned out and called to him. Lummy boy, come to Papa." The creature stirred, and the end of the viaduct stirred with him. About 12 feet of his front end emerged from under the structure, and he looked around wildly. "Here, Lum, up here!" Lummox caught sight of his friend and split his head in an idiotic grin. Sergeant Mendoza snapped, "Put her down, Slats. Let's get this over." The driver lowered a bit, then said anxiously, "That's enough, Sergeant. I saw that critter rear up earlier." All right. Mendoza opened the door and kicked out a rope ladder used in rescue work. "Can you go down that, son?" "Sure." With Mendoza to give him a hand, John Thomas shinnied out the door and got a grip on the ladder. He felt his way down and came to the point where there was no more ladder. He was still 6 feet above Lummox's head. He looked down. "Heads up, baby. Take me down." Lummox lifted another pair of legs from the ground and carefully placed his broad skull under John Thomas, who stepped onto it, staggering a little and grabbing for a handhold. Lummox lowered him gently to the ground. John Thomas jumped off and turned to face him. Well, the fall apparently had not hurt Lum any. That was a relief. He would get him home first and then go over him inch by inch. In the meantime, Lummox was nuzzling his legs and making a sound remarkably like a purr. John looked stern. "Bad Lummy, bad Lummy. You're a mess, aren't you?" Lummox looked embarrassed. He lowered his head to the ground, looked up at his friend, and opened his mouth wide. "I didn't mean to," he protested in his baby girl voice. "You didn't mean to. You didn't mean to. Oh, no, you never do. I'm going to take your front feet and stuff them down your throat. You know that, don't you? I'm going to beat you to a pulp and then use you for a rug. No supper for you. You didn't mean to, indeed." The bright red car came closer and hovered. "Okay?" demanded Chief Dressier. "Sure." "All right, here's the plan. I'm going to move that barrier up ahead. You get him back up on Hillcrest, going out the upper end of the draw. There will be an escort waiting. You fall in behind and stay with it all the way home. Get me?" "Okay." John Thomas saw that in both directions the Arroyo Road had been blocked with riot shields, tractors with heavy armor mounted on their fronts, so that a temporary barrier could be thrown across a street or square. Such equipment was standard for any city safety force since the riots of '91, but he could not recall that Westville had ever used them. He began to realize that the day Lummox went to town would not soon be forgotten. But he was happy that Lummox had been too timid to munch on those steel shields. He was beginning to hope that his pet had been too busy all afternoon to eat any ferrous metal. He turned back to him. "All right, get your ugly carcass out of that hole. We're going home." Lummox complied eagerly. The viaduct again trembled as he brushed against it. "Make me a saddle." Lummox's midsection slumped down a couple of feet. He thought about it very hard, and his upper surface shaped itself into contours resembling a chair. "Hold still," John Thomas ordered. "I don't want any mashed fingers." Lummox did so, quivering a little, and the young man scrambled up, grabbing at slip folds in Lummox's durable hide. He sat himself like a Raja ready for a tiger hunt. "All right, slow march now up the road." No, gee round, you numbskull. Uphill, not down." Docilely, Lummox turned and ambled away. 2 patrol ground cars led the way. 2 others brought up the rear. Chief Dressier's tomato-red runabout hung over them at a safe distance. John Thomas lounged back and spent the time composing, first, what he was going to say to Lummox, and second, what he was going to say to his mother. The first speech was much easier. He kept going back and embellishing it with fresh adjectives whenever he found himself running into snags on the second. They were halfway home when a single flyer, hopping free in a copter harness, approached the little parade. The flyer ignored the red warning lights stabbing out from the police chief's car and slanted straight down at the huge star beast. John Thomas thought that he recognized Betty's slapdash style even before he could make out features. He was not mistaken. He caught her as she cut power. Chief Dressier slammed a window open and stuck his head out. He was in full flow when Betty interrupted him. "Why, Chief Dressier, what a terrible way to talk!" He stopped and took another look. "Is that Betty Sorensen?" "Of course it is, and I must say, Chief, that after all the years you've taught Sunday school, I never thought I would live to hear you use such language. If that is setting a good example, I think young lady, hold your tongue." "Me? But you are the one who was using—" "Quiet. I've had all I can take today. You get that suit to buzzing and hop out of there. This is official business. Now get out." She glanced at John Thomas and winked, then set her face in cherubic innocence. "But, Chief, I can't." "Huh? Why not?" "I'm out of juice. This was an emergency landing." "Betty, you quit fibbing to me." "Me? Fibbing? Why, Deacon Dressier." "I'll deacon you. If your tanks are dry, get down off that beast and walk home. He's dangerous." "Lummy dangerous? Lummy wouldn't hurt a fly. And besides, do you want me to walk home alone, on a country road, when it's almost dark? I'm surprised at you." Dressier spluttered and closed the window. Betty wiggled out of her harness and settled back in the wider seat that Lummox had provided without being told. John Thomas looked at her. "Hi, Slugger." "Hi, Knothead." "I didn't know you knew the chief." "I know everybody. Now shut up. I've gotten here with all speed and much inconvenience as soon as I heard the newscast. You and Lummox between you could not manage to think your way out of this, even with Lummox doing most of the work. So I rallied round. Now give me the grisly details. Don't hold anything back from Mama." Smart aleck. "Don't waste time on compliments. This will probably be our only chance for a private word before they start worrying you, so you'd better talk fast." "Huh? What do you think you are, a lawyer?" "I'm better than a lawyer. My mind is not cluttered with stale precedent. I can be creative about it." Well, actually he felt better now that Betty was present. It was no longer just Lummox and himself against an unfriendly world. He poured out the story while she listened soberly. "Anybody hurt?" she asked at last. "I don't think so. At least they didn't mention it." "They would have." She sat up straight. "Then we've got nothing to worry about." "What? With hundreds, maybe thousands in damage? I'd like to know what you call trouble." "People getting hurt," she answered. "Anything else can be managed. Maybe we'll have Lummox go through bankruptcy." "Huh? That's silly." "If you think that is silly, you've never been in a law court." "Have you?" "Don't change the subject. After all, Lummox was attacked with a deadly weapon. It didn't hurt him. It just singed him a little. Beside the point, it undoubtedly caused him great mental anguish. I'm not sure he was responsible for anything that happened afterward. Be quiet and let me think." "Do you mind if I think too?" "Not as long as I don't hear the gears grind. Pipe down." The parade continued to the Stewart home in silence. Betty gave him one piece of advice as they stopped. "Admit nothing. Nothing. And don't sign anything. Holler if you need me." Mrs. Stewart did not come out to greet them. Chief Dressier inspected the gap in the grating with John Thomas, with Lummox hanging over their shoulders. The chief watched in silence as John Thomas took a string and tied it across the opening. "There, now he can't get out again." Dressier pulled at his lip. "Son, are you all right in the head?" "You don't understand, sir. The grating wouldn't stop him even if we repair it. Not if he wanted to get out. I don't know anything that would, but that string will. Lummox?" "Yes, Johnny." "See that string?" "Yes, Johnny." "You bust that string, I'll bust your silly head. Understand me?" "Yes, Johnny." "You won't go out of the yard again. Not ever, unless I take you." "All right, Johnny." "Promise? Cross your heart?" "Cross my heart." He hasn't really got a heart, Johnny went on. He has a decentralized circulatory system. It's like, I don't care if he has rotary pumps, as long as he stays home. He will. He's never broken across my heart, even if he hasn't got one. Dressier chewed his thumb. All right, I'll leave a man out here with a phone, and tomorrow we'll put some steel I-beams there in place of that wood. John started to say, oh, not steel, but thought better of it. Dressier said, what's the matter? Nothing. You keep an eye on him, too. He won't get out. He better not. You realize that you are both under arrest, don't you? But I've got no way to lock that monstrosity up. John Thomas did not answer. He had not realized it. Now he saw that it was inevitable. Dressier went on in a kindly voice. Try not to worry about it. You seem like a good boy, and everybody thought well of your father. Now I've got to go in and have a word with your mother. You'd better stay here until my man arrives, and then maybe sort of introduce him to this thing. He passed a doubtful eye over Lummox. John Thomas stayed while the police chief went back to the house. Now was the time to give Lummox what for, but he did not have the heart for it. Not just then. Chapter 2. The Department of Spatial Affairs. To John Thomas Stewart XI, the troubles of himself and Lummox seemed unique and unbearable, yet he was not alone, even around Westville. Little Mr. Ito was suffering from an always fatal disease, old age. It would kill him soon. Behind uncounted closed doors in Westville, other persons suffered silently with countless forms of quiet desperation which can close in on a man or woman for reasons of money, family, health, or face. Farther away in the state capitol, the governor stared hopelessly at a stack of papers, evidence that would certainly send to prison his oldest and most trusted friend. Much farther away on Mars, a prospector abandoned his wrecked sandmobile and got ready to attempt the long trek back to Outpost. He would never make it. Incredibly farther away, 27 light years, the starship Bolivar was entering an interspatial transition. A flaw in a tiny relay would cause that relay to operate 1/10 of a second later than it should. The SS Bolivar would wander between the stars for many years, but she would never find her way home. Inconceivably farther from Earth, halfway across the local star cloud, a race of arboreal crustaceans was slowly losing to a younger, more aggressive race of amphibians. It would be several thousand Earth years before the crustaceans were extinct, but the issue was not in doubt. This was regrettable by human standards, for the crustacean race had mental and spiritual abilities which complemented human traits in a fashion which could have permitted a wealth of civilized cooperation with them. But when the first Earth humans landed there, some 11,000 years in the future, the crustaceans would be long dead. Back on Earth, at Federation Capital, His Excellency the Right Honorable Henry Gladstone Kiku, M.A., Oxford, Lit D, Honoris Causa, Cape Town, OBE, Permanent Undersecretary for Spatial Affairs, was not worried about the doomed crustaceans because he would never know of them. He was not yet worried about SS Bolivar, but he would be. Aside from the ship, the loss of one passenger in that ship would cause a chain reaction of headaches for Mr. Kiku and all his associates for years to come. Anything and everything outside Earth's ionosphere was Mr. Kiku's responsibility and worry. Anything which concerned the relationships between Earth and any part of the explored universe was also his responsibility. Even affairs which were superficially strictly Earthside were also his concern if they affected or were in any way affected by anything which was extraterrestrial, interplanetary, or interstellar in nature. A very wide range indeed. His problems included such things as the importation of Martian sandgrass suitably mutated for the Tibetan Plateau. Mr. Kiku's office had not approved that until after a careful mathematical examination of the possible effect on the Australian sheep industry and a dozen other factors. Such things were done cautiously, with the gruesome example of Madagascar and the Martian berry route always before them. Economic decisions did not upset Mr. Kiku, no matter how many toes he stepped on. Other sorts kept him awake nights, such as his decision not to give police escorts to Goddard exchange students from Procyon 7, despite the very real danger to them from provincial Earthmen with prejudices against beings having unearthly arrangements of limbs or eyes or such. The cephalopods of that planet were touchy people, and something very like a police escort was their own usual punishment for criminals. Mr. Kiku had an extremely large staff to help him, of course, and also, of course, the help of the secretary himself. The secretary made speeches, greeted very important visitors, gave out interviews, and in many other ways eased for Mr. Kiku an otherwise unbearable load. Mr. Kiku would be the first to admit this. As long as the current secretary behaved himself, minded his business, took care of public appearances, and let the undersecretary get on with the department's work, he had Mr. Kiku's approval. Of course, if he failed to pull his load or threw his weight around, Mr. Kiku was capable of finding ways to get rid of him. But it had been 15 years since he had found it necessary to be so drastic. Even the rawest political appointee could usually be broken to harness. Mr. Kiku had not made up his mind about the current secretary, but was not now thinking about him. Instead, he was looking over the top-sheet synopsis for Project Cerberus, a power proposal for the research station on Pluto. A reminder light on his desk flashed, and he looked up to see the door between his office and that of the secretary dilate. The secretary walked in, whistling "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Mr. Kiku did not recognize the tune. He broke off. "Greetings, Henry. No, don't get up." Mr. Kiku had not started to get up. "How do you do, Mr. Secretary? What can I do for you?" "Nothing much, nothing much." He paused by Mr. Kiku's desk and picked up the project folder. "What are you swatting now? Cerberus, eh? Henry, that's an engineering matter. Why should we worry about it?" "There are aspects," Mr. Kiku answered carefully, "that concern us." "I suppose so. Budget and so forth." His eye sought the bold-faced line reading, "Estimated cost 3.5 megabucks and 7.4 lives." "What's this? I can't go before the council and ask them to approve this. It's fantastic." "The first estimate," Mr. Kiku said evenly, "was over 8 megabucks and more than 100 lives." "I don't mind the money, but this other... You are, in effect, asking the council to sign death warrants for 7 4/10 men. You can't do that. It isn't human. Say, what the deuce is 4/10 of a man anyway? How can you kill a fraction of a man?" "Mr. Secretary," his subordinate answered patiently, "any project bigger than a schoolyard swing involves probable loss of life. But that hazard factor is low. It means that working on Project Cerberus will be safer on average than staying Earthside. That's my rule of thumb." "Eh?" The secretary looked again at the synopsis. "Why not say so? Put the thing in the best light and so forth." "This report is for my eyes, for our eyes only. The report to the council will emphasize safety precautions and will not include an estimate of deaths, which, after all, is a guess." A guess. Yes, of course." The secretary put the report down, seemed to lose interest. "Anything else, sir?" "Oh, yes. Henry, old man, you know that the Rargelian dignitary I'm supposed to receive today, Dr. What's-his-name?" "Dr. Ftamel." Mr. Kiku glanced at his desk control panel. "Your appointment is an hour and 7 minutes from now." "That's just it. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to substitute. Apologies to him and so forth. Tell him I'm tied up with affairs of state." "Sir, I wouldn't advise that. He will expect to be received by an official of your rank, and the Rargelians are extremely meticulous about protocol." "Oh, come now, this native won't know the difference." "But he will, sir." "Well, let him think that you're me. I don't care. But I won't be here, and that's that. The Secretary General has invited me to go to the ball game with him, and an invitation from the SG is a must, you know." Mr. Kiku knew that it was nothing of the sort, had the commitment been explained, but he shut up. "Very well, sir." "Thanks, old chap." The secretary left again, whistling. When the door closed, Mr. Kiku, with an angry gesture, slapped a row of switches on the desk panel. He was locked in now and could not be reached by phone, video, tube, auto-writer, or any other means, save by an alarm button which his own secretary had used only once in 12 years. He leaned elbows on his desk, covered his head with his hands, and rubbed his fingers through his woolly pate. This trouble, that trouble, the other trouble, and always some moron to jiggle his elbow. Why had he ever left Africa? Where came this itch for public service, an itch that had long since turned into mere habit? He sat up and opened his middle drawer. It was bulging with real estate prospectuses from Kenya. He took out a handful and soon was comparing relative merits of farms. Now here was a little honey if a man had the price, better than 800 acres, half of it in cultivation, and 7 proved wells on the property. He looked at map and photographs and presently felt better. After a while, he put them away and closed the drawer. He was forced to admit that while what he had told the chief was true, his own nervous reaction came mostly from his lifelong fear of snakes. If Dr. Ftamel were anything but a Rargelian, or if the Rargelians had not been Medusa humanoids, he wouldn't have minded. Of course, he knew that those tentacles growing out of the Rargelian's head were not snakes, but his stomach didn't know it. He would have to find time for a hypnotic treatment before... No, there wasn't time. He'd have to take a pill instead. Sighing, he flipped the switches back on. His incoming basket started to fill up at once, and all the communication instruments showed lights. But the lights were amber rather than blinking red. He ignored them and glanced through the stuff falling into his basket. Most of the items were for his information only. Under doctrine, his subordinates and their subordinates had taken action. Occasionally, he would check a name and suggest an action and drop the sheet into the gaping mouth of the outgoing basket. A radio type came in that was not routine, in that it concerned a creature alleged to be extraterrestrial but unclassified as to type and origin. The incident involved seemed unimportant, some nonsense in one of the native villages in the western part of the continent, but the factor of an extraterrestrial creature automatically required the local police to report it to spatial affairs, and the lack of classification of the ET prevented action under doctrine and resulted in the report being kicked upstairs. Mr. Kiku had never seen Lummox and would have had no special interest if he had. But Mr. Kiku knew that each contact with out there was unique. The universe was limitless in its variety. To assume without knowledge, to reason by analogy, to take the unknown for granted, all meant to invite disaster. Mr. Kiku looked over his list to see whom he could send. Any of his career officers could act as a court of original and superior jurisdiction in any case involving extraterrestrials, but who was on Earth and free? Sergei Greenberg, that was the man. System Trade Intelligence could get along without a chief for a day or two. He flipped a switch. Sergei? Yes, boss? Busy? Well, yes and no. I'm paring my nails and trying to figure a reason why the taxpayers should pay me more money. Should they now? I'm sending you a blue sheet. Mr. Kiku checked Greenberg's name on the radio type, dropped it in his outgoing basket, waited a few seconds until he saw Greenberg pick it out of his own income basket. Read it. Greenberg did so, then looked up. Well, boss? Phone the local justice that we are assuming tentative jurisdiction, then buzz out and look into it. Thy wish is my command, O king. Even money the critter is terrestrial after all. 2 to 1 I can identify it if it isn't. No wager, not at those odds. You're probably right, but it might be a special situation. We can't take chances. I'll keep the local yokels in line, boss. Where is this hamlet? Westville? Where is that? How would I know? You have the sheet in front of you. Greenberg glanced at it. Hey, what do you know? It's in the mountains. This may take 2 or 3 weeks, boss. Hot enough for you? Take more than 3 days, and I'll charge it off your annual leave. Mr. Kiku switched off and turned to other matters. He disposed of a dozen calls, found the bottom of his incoming basket and lost it again, then noticed it was time for the Rargelian. Goose flesh crawled over him, and he dug hastily into his desk for one of those special pills his doctor had warned him not to take too frequently. He had just gulped it when his secretary's light started blinking. "Sir, Dr. Ftamel is here." "Show him in." Mr. Kiku muttered in a language his ancestors had used in making magic. Against snakes, for example. As the door dilated, he hung on his face the expression suitable for receiving visitors. And we will follow the careers of Mr. Kiku, Mr. Greenberg, John Thomas, and above all, Lummox next time.